and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have Alejandro Rojas coming up in just a minute with the UFO updates. Our guest this evening, a repeat guest, Christopher O'Brien. He was on last January, so about 10 months or so ago. And we're going to be talking about all different aspects of the UFO field and a lot more. Well, all regarding UFOs, I would imagine, or similar topics. So I want to thank everyone that supports the show and very much. And it's going to be Thanksgiving here in America tomorrow, so I want to give an extra thanks to all you people that have helped out and help keep us on the air. And you can support the show for $2 or more per month, and that information is on podcastufo.com. And if you can't support the show and you still want to listen to it live, you can always go to podcastufo.com every Wednesday evening at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can also listen to the whole show as a podcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that's on Thursdays from 10 to midnight, and that's Eastern Standard Time as well. And so that's it for me. Alejandro, are you doing anything exciting for Thanksgiving? I know it's just in America. We have a lot of other listeners, but it's one of my favorite holidays. It's very festive. I enjoy it.
Good.
No, I asked you a question.
Oh. Well, you asked me, and then you said, and then you were asking me if I'm doing something special.
Yeah.
You know what? The typical dinner with family type of stuff. So that's kind of fun, and having some family in town I haven't had in town in a while. And since I got my new house, so I'm excited to show them the house. So.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Yeah.
So, yeah, it should be fun. I mean, I like hanging out with family and stuff and loved ones. So I am definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. So before we get into the news, I did want to talk. You and I both watched Arrival, and I don't want to do any spoilers out there to listeners who haven't who haven't watched it yet. But I really, really enjoyed that movie. I thought it was great. And what did you think of it?
I liked it too. You know, it was what I thought it would be, more like Contact, so it's not a shoot 'em up kind of alien thing. But it makes you think. I mean, it really makes you think, and especially for people in this field to think about this topic often. It's fun to have movies like this that kind of change your perspective a bit and give you something new to think about. And that movie did that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of meat to it, and it was more, I was expecting, maybe a lot more special effects, and I was glad that they weren't. It was really based more on the meat of the topic than it was on special effects, although there were some really good ones. But it wasn't crazy with special effects like some of the movies are.
Yeah, what's cool about the special effects on this movie too is that they're really good. So it doesn't feel like special effects. I mean, it's not this action stuff. It's just places and craft, of course, and creatures. But they're done so well that it doesn't feel like special effects. So. Very well done.
And I think they handled it pretty well with the predictability of the human nature, and that is, again, I'm trying not to spoil anything, but violence always seems to be part of our nature, and I better stop talking or I am going to spoil things. But it's kind of like I thought they portrayed that very accurately.
And I think to me, I don't think this will spoil. And you can cut it if you think I am. I don't think so. But one of the questions I walk away from and really made me think about is, are we ready? And, people can see the events in the movie and see what they think of that. But it really, I keep coming back to that question, thinking about the different, scenarios and things maybe you wouldn't think of that were brought up in this movie.
Yeah, and good actors, not big name actors, but really good actors in that. And again, the movie's called Arrival, and if you're into this topic, I really suggest to check it out. It's a great movie. I give it a thumbs up, 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, definitely a must watch for people who are into this topic. And in the spirit of the movie, I give it 8 thumbs up.
Very good. They'll understand after they watch it.
Yeah.
All right. So anything going on in the UFO world?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll talk to you next week then.
All right. Have a good Thanksgiving. Happy Turkey Day.
All right.
No, there are a couple of things happening.
Oh, okay.
I wrote a story yesterday that I'm proud of that I hope you let me share.
Yes, do, please.
But I think it's interesting. So I wanted to wait until this whole Podesta email thing was finished, wait till the elections was over to kind of recap. And this story's actually been brewing. I've been saving information, conversing with people. And then I wanted to finally take a look back to see what story that came out of the WikiLeaks. And I think that I've got it, and I highlighted it here. And really what I've seen here, and there is a guy who emails me, and I thank him at the end of the story, named Elephant in the Room, and he had kind of similar ideas, and he was really helpful in giving me a couple of pieces of information I was not aware of. But in these emails, Tom DeLonge, of course, we talked about this meeting he had with these 2 generals. One of them who worked at Wright-Patterson was in charge of research labs. One of them who worked with the commander of Space Command. And then this private guy worked in the private sector who worked with Lockheed Skunk Works, who, of course, is in charge of Area 51. So, and Podesta, John Podesta, Hillary's campaign manager, arranged all this. So the top of the top, these are the people who you would want to talk to. Well, interesting enough, what's interesting about this is that actually Tom DeLonge seemed to be a little disappointed in the meeting. He wrote an email that we can see after the meeting saying that McCaslin, who is the Wright-Patterson general, DeLonge says to Podesta, he mentioned he's a skeptic. He's not. I've been working with him for 4 months. I just got done giving him a 4-hour presentation of the entire project a few weeks ago. He goes on to say that McCaslin actually helped him assemble his advisory team. He also made note that, of course, McCaslin was in charge of the labs at Wright-Patterson, which is where he says, that the Roswell craft was taken. So DeLonge obviously believes in the Roswell crash and everything. Now, I spoke with Grant Cameron, and we debated a bit. But, like Grant points out, these guys knew who they were going into a meeting with. They knew they were going in with Tom DeLonge, who believes that aliens or technology has been back engineered from crashed UFOs. He believes in Roswell, stuff like this. He shared that. In fact, that's what his project is about UFOs and back engineering. So why would they talk to him? What's even more interesting, of course, is that Tom DeLonge says this guy advised him and helped him come up with his group of people. Well, looking back in other comments Tom DeLonge has made, including on Facebook, he says, for instance, he talks about landing at a tarmac, walking off the plane, meeting a guy in his 60s who's a multi-star general. They began to talk, and this general told him that we found a life form. Tom says, he said, I need help getting this story out to young adults. And the general said, what do you need? And Tom DeLonge said, advisors. And then he says that this person helped him come up with a team of advisors. Wow. So essentially he's saying here, he's implying that this McCaslin helped him come up with advisors, and told him that they had found a body. So, I mean, I think that's really significant. And the question here is, of course, is Tom lying? Did McCaslin not really say this? Another theory, which Robbie Graham, who wrote the book Silver Screened Saucers, some people may be familiar with him. He's in the UK, and he has a different aspect. He's been writing on Mysterious Universe, a blog about how Tom DeLonge could be a victim of disinformation from the military. And there have been situations where the military has approached the media, said, hey, we're going to give you information, proof that we've interacted with aliens that you can release to the public. And then later on, at later stages, they say, nope, sorry, we can't do that.
Linda Moulton Howe for one.
Yeah, Linda Moulton Howe. The person who approached her was Richard Doty. And, of course, I've written quite a bit about that, and I embedded my videos where I do a whole analysis on that whole situation. But Robbie has been writing about more. So those are kind of two perspectives. There's Grant, who's saying, oh, no, this is happening. The general probably does want to release this information. He's working with Tom DeLonge to do it. There's Robbie saying, no, he's a victim of disinformation. He's just falling prey, similar to what these other people have done. The thing is, in both of these scenarios, that we would find out soon. So in other words, if Grant is right, like Grant says, even come January, he says, we're going to know, because the next step will be taken, and they'll release some information, and some sort of, step towards UFO disclosure will be happening. In the Robbie scenario, then the military at some point, maybe even using these WikiLeaks, because they probably weren't expecting these WikiLeaks, but maybe even using them as an excuse, saying, oh, we can't work with you anymore, Tom DeLonge. We've told you all this important stuff, but now we can't give you that proof or anything to move forward, which is what they did in the past. They said, nope, sorry, and walked away. Another scenario is that they just have an interest in UFOs, like John Podesta, and they do want to help him out. But even if that's the case, they're helping someone out who's essentially saying, like especially with this McCaslin general, that he's part of this major cover-up, covering up this alien technology they got from the Roswell crash that they're holding at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So it's just really weird. It's an odd mystery. I think it's really interesting. And we're probably not done, because DeLonge has said he's still working on all of this. We know Podesta is still into UFOs. We don't know what he thinks of all of this. But I think it's just a really incredible, really interesting mystery that's posed here. And even if Robbie's right and it's disinformation, the military's kind of got busted. In the past, we don't really have names or anything. But in this case, we do know McCaslin was at least attending this meeting and everything. And, Tom DeLonge didn't mean to call him out or name him, but now he is named. So,
well, Doty's been named in the past, as far as
Doty was named. Doty named himself, yeah. So, but Doty also says he had his own handlers, who he has not divulged who they are.
Yeah.
So, and people question whether or not he did have handlers or not. So, yeah, it's really weird. I think it's a really great mystery. So I've outlined all of this for people on this story I wrote recently.
Wow, great. And are you going to reach out to Tom yourself? Because I know he was on Open Minds at one time, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've interviewed him. He used to have a website called Strange Times, where he would repost our work with our permission, with links back to us. So we did have somewhat of a relationship. He actually came to the UFO Congress.
Right.
Because when Bob Lazar was there, he actually, of course, has spoken with George Knapp on Coast to Coast. And but we haven't spoken in a while, and really haven't heard from him. And I guess I've been working through a friend of a friend So he is aware of what I'm writing and keeping up on, and this friend of a friend, it says I'm doing well and not stumbling, like not making assumptions or not stepping out of line or connecting the dots in a silly way or anything. So, but so far he hasn't reached out or anything. I'm not sure that he will.
Yeah.
Of course, he's big time and he's working with these big guys, but it would be wonderful if he did, because I really, if you look at it, people criticize Tom DeLonge and what he's doing, but what would you do, as a question, if you had this? If you had the ability to meet with these generals to discuss these topics, you may be cognizant or wary that it's possibly a disinformation situation, but I would still meet with them. I would still talk with them and create these relationships. So I don't –
yeah.
I think it's wise that he's doing that. Hopefully – he's not being dishonest in any way, like some people are implying, but
I don't think it would be any to his benefit at all to be dishonest.
Yeah, he doesn't need to. They were saying maybe for marketing purposes, trying to get people more excited about what he's doing. But I really, again, I think that it's great he's pursuing this. And he's getting to places that other researchers have not been able to get.
Right.
And for better or worse, now due to mostly WikiLeaks, we're getting some insight into the great progress he has made. So, yeah, I don't really blame him for doing what he's doing. I think it's really interesting, and I would love to talk to him.
Yeah, I hope you get to. Well, we're plumb out of time, so if we had any other UFO news, we're going to just have to table it for next week. Yeah.
Okay.
All righty. All right. Hey, thanks, man. And we'll
no problem.
We'll see you next week, and have a great Thanksgiving tomorrow.
You too. Have a great Turkey Day.
I will. All right. All right. Hang in, everyone. We'll be right back after this quick music break with Chris O'Brien. Wow. That music, I forget to mention this sometimes, but Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse from Ireland writes music for movies, and a lot of movies, and some that are, big movies, not just independents. Anyway, he supplies music for this show, and that was written for the Allagash incident. And he has a bunch of different ones. So, of course, we play these little parts of these clips almost every show. And welcome to the show, Chris.
There, happy day before Turkey Day.
That's right. Right. I think this is your third visit on this show, and you're always welcome, always a lot of fun. And so we have a lot of new listeners all the time. Just I know that you're part of the Paracast, so you know what that's about. So if you can go a little bit into your background, but one thing I don't think I've ever asked you is what got you interested in the UFO topic and other topics that you're interested in the very beginning?
Well, that's I guess a good question, and for many years, I would not really fess up to the real reason, because starting out as an open-minded skeptic, but a healthily skeptical field investigator, I didn't publicly come out with this particular motivation for many years, because I didn't want it to color people's impression of me and then consequently my work. But I'm an experiencer. I had a very up close and personal encounter when I was 7 years old in Bellevue, Washington. Wow. It's similar in some ways to a lot of encounters that, of course, people have heard about since the 70s, basically, late 70s, early 80s, around the Whitley Strieber time period, where there seems to have been quite an upsurge in contactee reports, encounter reports, abductions, that sort of thing. But when I was 7 years old, I woke up one night in the spring of I'm not sure if I was 7 or just about to turn 7, but it was in the spring of 1963. I'm 59, and I had these non-human entities about the same height as me, ringing around the foot of my bed, and it was pitch black in my room. My room was kind of half in the basement, half underground in the basement. If I stood on my bed as a little kid, I could put my chin right at ground level, and I had two windows that were at ground level, about 6 feet off the ground, 5 feet off the ground. And so my bedroom was unusually dark because it was outside my window was a cantilever. The house didn't go all the way down to the ground. The upper floor above me stuck out into the yard about 4 or 5 feet. So it was unusually dark in there at night. And the only reason that I was able to detect that there was something there is because the three entities at the foot of the bed, there seemed to be a fourth one in the back that was kind of hiding. That may have been a little bit taller, but they were about the same height as me, about 3.5, about 4 feet tall. And they were holding these about 2 foot lit. I called them stickmen with spears. It was the only description that I could give my family. But there were three beings, impossibly skinny. I mean, with arms like maybe about as thick as my thumb, I mean, really super skinny. That's why I called them stickmen. And they had these kind of hands. I couldn't really get much detail from the hands, but they were holding these lit wands that had this light that was kind of jumping up and down and sparkling. And there was enough light so it illuminated them. And not much, but enough so that I could see that they were not your normal, humanoid, a person. Mm-hmm. And of course, first thing I did was hide under the covers and hoping that I was dreaming. And when I pulled the covers back down, they were still there. I was not paralyzed. I had full mobility. And of course, the first thing I did was dash out of the room. I just ran to the left, sideways out the door, turned the corner, went up 10 stairs to the landing outside right inside the front door, and they had either teleported to the top of the stairway that went up to my parents' side of the house, or there was another group there. I don't know. But when I turned the corner at the top of the staircase in the landing inside the front door, they were standing at the top of the next set of stairs.
Jeez. Sounds like a nightmare.
I had no choice but to run through the kitchen, and I was going to go through the kitchen door and run around the house through the backyard because my parents had their own outside entrance. And I pulled the door open and I wanted to run through the door, and I forgot my dad had put the screen door on. And I ran right into the screen door, boom. And it literally knocked me down. And I turned and looked, and they were standing at the other end of the kitchen looking at me. And I got a little bit better look at him at that point. And I'm not sure why, but I ended up running down the driveway and then through the hedge to the neighbor's house, because I thought if I could bang on their door, they'd let me in, and I could call my parents and say, look, something weird is going on here. I banged on the Richards' door, my neighbors, and nobody answered. And I looked back, and the Richards had a 3-step terraced yard. So there was like a platform, and then some gardens, and then about 4 feet down another platform of grass, and then went down to another area to some hedges. And I could see the tops of their heads just barely, and they weren't bobbing. They were moving in a very smooth motion, and they kind of stopped together and moved together. It was almost like they were one thing, but they were, definitely separate. So my only recourse, because nobody answered the door, was to run out in the middle of keep going towards the next neighbor's house, and they had a big lawn with like a street light that was right by their garage, and the street light lit their driveway outside of the garage. And I ran out in the middle of the lawn, and I stood there for a second because it was obvious they were following me. So I wanted to see them. I had plenty of room around me, and I wanted to really get a better look at them when they came through the light from the street light or farm light that the Richards had. And I've told this story a number of times on the air over the years now, but the weirdest thing about the whole incident, if what I've described already isn't weird enough, is they approached the light, and then they turned. The only way I can describe this is they turned sideways, and it was like they had no depth. They came through the light as thin lines. It's like when you take a piece of paper and you turn it sideways. And that absolutely terrified me. The next thing I remember was pounding on the next neighbor's door. I don't recall seeing them following me, but the last thing I remember is the porch light coming on. The Barkers, who are the other neighbors, their porch light came on, and the next thing I know, I'm 3 houses away, across the street. I'm several hundred yards away. I'm at the end of a porch. I don't know how I got there. My sister is coming on the porch in her nightgown, in her robe, and she took me home. And of course, I refused to go down in my bedroom. And my sister was 18.
Now, why was she there at that other house?
Well, it turns out that the Barkers had called my house, and she was the one that picked up the phone.
I see.
And she said, the Kimmy, as I was called when I was a kid, is out here hysterical. We don't know what's going on. And so she went over there. I wasn't there, and then she started looking for me. And she said that she looked for me for about 15 or 20 minutes. It may have been longer. She wasn't quite sure, but that was kind of but it wasn't. Actually, I quizzed her on this in the late 90s about this, and I said, "You remember that time?" And she said, "Yeah, I do." And so we kind of compared notes, and she thought it was very strange. So she let me climb into bed with her, and because I was pretty terrified, really, and kind of just to give you a sense of how deeply traumatized I was. She said that I tried to nurse her. She'd never told me this until I brought this back up in the 90s, and she said, "Yeah, you tried to nurse me when you were in bed."
Yeah.
And of course, my parents said you had a dream, you had a nightmare, you were sleepwalking. Of course, I've never sleptwalked ever before or since. I've never had a full-on experience like this since.
Oh, you haven't? I was going to ask that.
No, I did have another instance that happened, but I think it was a group. It's in my first book. the Mysterious Valley. I had something come through the wall in my bedroom in Colorado, and it was almost like a rippling in the air. I really couldn't see. It was almost like they were cloaked. Similar kind of situation. They came through very close to me on my right side through the wall. The headboard of the bed that my girlfriend and I slept in was against the outside wall, and they came in. I felt a large presence. There was a number of them, and they seemed to gather around the foot of the bed. I woke her up and quietly and said, "Look at the foot of the bed. Do you see anything?" And she said, "No." I always thought that was, I wanted validation. I wanted, somebody.
Yeah.
And she was very sensitive. And come to find out 2 weeks later, I found out actually a number of days later that my neighbor, who was about maybe 200 feet away, the next house over in the little town I lived in, that something had happened to her and her child, but she didn't want to talk about it. And so it took about 2 weeks for me to kind of soften her up, and she went ahead and agreed to talk to me. Of course, she didn't want me to use her name, but I can say that she was the widow of a very, very famous psychologist from England who I've named elsewhere, so I might as well, Artie Lang's widow. And she said that a group of humanoid gray-type aliens had come through the wall of her son's bedroom. She happened to be sleeping on the love seat that was in his bedroom because he was really upset that night. And she saw them come through. She said that they were like rippling water when they came through the wall, and then they became fully present. She could see them. They were opaque. And she said they ignored her, but they were concentrating on her boy. And she surrounded herself and her son with light and closed her eyes and prayed and said, "If you're not, of the light, leave." And they stuck around for a little bit but left. And I was really intrigued by this. And I said, "Did you happen to take notes of when this happened?" She goes, "Yeah, I keep a journal." It happened 20 minutes after I had my experience, just 200, 300 feet away. So it was the same night within less than a half an hour time period. So I'm pretty convinced that I picked up on something that night. And if people are interested in that particular event, I do go into it in detail in the Mysterious Valley, and then my own personal experience as a child. I mentioned in my third book, but. For many years, I refused. I just knew I couldn't tell anybody about this except my family. My brother, he was a year younger than me. He believed me, and we shared another experience later on. There were no entities involved, but we saw craft coming over Lake Washington late at night. We had a couple of interesting experiences. I was woken up by my bedside table drawer moving in and out on its own, and the rattling of the wooden drawer is what woke me up. There was a strange green glow. Went downstairs. Craft was out coming from west to east over Lake Washington. We had a beautiful view of Seattle from across the lake in Bellevue. And so in answer to your question, I know that's kind of a long answer, but that changed my life. I had not been exposed to science fiction. I wasn't allowed to watch TV except at Disney and Lawrence Welk and a few select programs that my parents would allow my brother and I to watch. I wasn't exposed to mass media. They were very down on. They were very protective of us. I had no concept of what aliens were. Maybe peripherally, I kind of did, but no images or anything like that. And if I did have images, they weren't anything like what I experienced. This was way outside of my realm of experience and comprehension as a 7-year-old. And but I'll tell you, I learned to read at 4. I was a very bright kid, and I immediately just devoured every book I could find on the subject.
How'd you know what it was, though? I mean, when you're 7 years old, like you said, it took a long. When did you start reading books on this? I should ask.
As soon as I got a library card.
But I mean, how did you know what it was? I mean, you're a 7-year-old. These things show up at your bed. Did you have any thoughts? I mean, did you think they just have to be from another planet or something? Or
no, I never thought that. It was only going through looking for information. I thought maybe that they were, I was exposed then to elves and fairies, and then, the whole idea of UFOs and aliens were kind of cemented into my head because of the experience of seeing the glowing kind of green oval coming across the lake. And I'm not even sure. This was about 6 months later. I wasn't even sure. I didn't know if the two events were related. I remember yelling at them, "What do you want? Why are you following me? Say something." And they were completely neutral. They seemed almost like they were in a trance. I've blocked out what their eyes look like. I don't recall. I don't remember big almond-shaped eyes. I do remember they had a pasty, whitish, kind of matte, non-reflective skin tone. They had spindly, like I said, impossibly skinny, spindly limbs. The one in the back seemed to have possibly clothes or a cloak or something on. I couldn't really tell. There were no clothing, no identifying genitalia. I don't remember ears or even mouths. I can't really even recall if they had mouths. And they seemed to they move like cattails in the wind. They move perfectly in sync together, which really was quite startling. So, I started devouring every book that I could read, and started accumulating books, some of which I still have. Some of the original Adamski books and a Donald Menzel book, who was an early debunker. As a kid, I really wanted to try to explain away this whole experience, somehow come up with some sort of information that would, kind of put my mind at ease. And it wasn't until the early 90s I was reading a John Keel book, I think Operation Trojan Horse. He mentions 3 cases of children having experiences in Redmond, I think, and in Issaquah, which are 2 towns. One's on the west side of Bellevue and the other's on the east side of Bellevue. And it was during that same spring of '63 that there were 2 other cases, I think 2 or 3. And one of the kids said stickmen, used the same exact term that I did. I'm not sure which Keel book it is, and I'm pretty sure it's a Keel book. And that was kind of some major validation for me many years later, obviously, 30 years later. But something like that happening to you changes. You absolutely have a completely 180-degree view about reality. I knew that these things were extremely strange. I couldn't find it took me a long time to really find any information. I devoured every UFO book I could find. I remember reading Incident at Exeter when it came out, Interrupted Journey when it came out, and I kept this whole thing secret. I didn't profess any sort of interest in the subject for years and years and years until I was in high school. I started to, let my interest and my curiosity be known to friends and stuff. Of course, I did dabble in quite a number of psychedelics when I was in high school and college. So that allowed me, I think, the freedom to talk to close friends about it. And, I lived in New York City for many years, and you just don't talk about aliens and UFOs when you live in Manhattan. It's social suicide. And I knew better. And it wasn't until I had moved out to Colorado in 1989 that stuff. I did have a sighting experience in '79 up in New Paltz with a number of friends. Half of which were tripping and the other half weren't, by the way. We went to a Gentle Giant concert, and I've happened to spot some stars that seemed to be moving, and brought everybody's attention to it. And we lay on the football field, and sure enough, they were milling around. And those of us, under the influence, were the saw them first, and the other people, it took them a little while to see them, but then it was obvious because they started zipping around fairly obviously, and we got bored and went to a party after they settled down. It's kind of strange, but it wasn't until I got out to Colorado and had events happening literally overhead of the town and starting to investigate them. I wrote an article for the local paper, which got picked up by the news services and went all over the world. And I got inundated with people interested in the article. And God, 2 or 3 months later, Unsolved Mysteries showed up and sightings and all these TV shows and stuff because of the kinds of activity that were going on in Colorado at the time. And I do document all this in my books about the San Luis Valley, where I lived in Colorado. Probably some of your listeners are aware of my work there, but I did meticulously put together a database of my investigations, which I'm going to be publishing. I had so many people asking me for information about the sighting events that I was investigating, investigators from all over the world, that I started publishing a monthly report to send out free. I didn't charge for it. To send out to other investigators to keep them up to speed on what was going on. And I think I did 6 years of these things. When the activity would die out for months at a time, there would be 2, 3, 4 months I wouldn't put out one, but then boom, as soon as I had enough stuff to put together in my Mysterious Valley report, as I called it, I'd send it out. It's a stack. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit them all in a single book, but there's I had 10 data points for my database, and I had around 1,000 separate events that I investigated or was made aware of and made phone calls and did my best to cover 10,000 square miles. The San Luis Valley is the world's largest alpine valley, and I put up 300,000 miles on my truck in 6 years, running around investigating cattle mutilation cases and UFO reports and crypto, Bigfoot, other types of things, occult crime, kind of strange sort of brujo, Native American weirdness, a whole kind of potpourri of things that came my way through the local law enforcement, the local university. I was working with the head of the Department of Sociology and a couple of astronomy students there, and I was the unofficial deputy of weirdness for like 4 or 5 counties in Colorado. They had my number there by the dispatcher, and if somebody would call up with a report, they'd tell them to get in touch with me. And because I was local and I honored people's requests for anonymity, and I didn't embellish things and I didn't sensationalize things, people trusted me, and I was able to make quite a bit of headway and pull cases out. Neighbors would call and say, you got to talk to so-and-so, something landed in their field, or a family member would call and say, these people don't want to talk about it, my uncle or whomever. And, I'd work on them slowly and get them to open up so that I could get the data. But I'm really proud of my database. It's probably the largest database from a single geographic region. Maybe Ann Druffels is bigger from the L.A. Basin area. Because she had an extra 25, 30-year head start on me. But, man, I'll tell you, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reports in there. And those are the only the reports that had 10 data points. If I didn't have a date, a time, a duration, I couldn't use it in my database. So I literally had thousands of stories, reports, that sort of thing. But the ones that made the database had to have the 10 data points.
Mm. Wow. We have a number of questions on the forum, and by the way, anyone can join the forum. It's a real easy sign in. I just have to approve you because of the spammers. But anyway, before that though, I just wanted to ask you, when you're telling your story at 7 years old, a few people in the chat room said, "Wow, that's almost like way too detailed for a 7-year-old." I just wanted you to address that. But also,
yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel? How does it make you feel to tell that story? I mean, does it get you?
Now I'm okay with it because I have gone public with it. In terms of detail, I have a semi-photographic memory. I was extremely bright as a child, gifted child in gifted programs. I have a very good recall, especially the younger I was, the better my recall was. And this kind of experience was emblazoned into my mind. I remember details that this is the most vivid memory I have from my childhood, besides getting my front two teeth knocked out by a line drive playing baseball. That was kind of a hard one to forget. A couple of bad falls on my bike. I remember in great detail. Human memory is interesting, and that is a good point. Normally people don't have real good recall when it comes to most mundane things that happen in our lives, and 99.999% of our lives are mundane. But I recall dreams from my childhood, very vivid dreams, some reoccurring that have nothing to do with UFOs particularly, but being a little kid and sneaking under the table during the Christmas party. This would have been when I was 8 or 9, and sneaking half filled glasses of wine and trying them under the table with my brother. Going to Disneyland. Remember that really well. I remember where I was when Kennedy was assassinated. I remember it in great detail. I happened to be in L.A. with my mom and my little brother, and I remember the cops pulling a dead body out of the trunk of a car as we came out into the parking lot. So vivid experiences tend to become emblazoned in your in your mind and in your memory banks, and they do have staying power.
Okay. Another person asked, have you ever considered or have you ever had regression therapy? Hypnotherapy?
No. I did one time when I was 13. My mom took me because I got so bored in school. I already knew all the answers, and all the kids. I just was way ahead of everybody, and I started acting up in school. And so my mom took me to the first certified hypnotherapist in the United States, Dr. Ivor Berkland. Look him up. And his son was Buzzy Berkland, who was the chief orthopedic doctor for the U.S. ski team. And Ivar Berkland's grandson, Bob Berkland, was on my soccer team, the 3-Point Hornets. We were Washington State champions in youth soccer. I was in the first youth soccer league in the United States. Buzzy, his dad, was a psychologist and was the first licensed hypnotherapist. And my mom took me for some motivational hypnotherapy, and I think I may have been regressed because she never let me go back, and she was freaked out when she talked to Berkland about my session, and she wouldn't let me hear what they were talking about, and I never went back. And I do remember him asking me some things about my my earlier childhood, because I was adopted. My brother and I were both adopted by the O'Briens, and for some reason because I was in a hypno state, I don't remember the exact questions, but I do have a sense that he was asking me about earlier times, and I was about 13 at that point. And my mom, uncharacteristically, she wouldn't talk about it. And I asked her and badgered her, and she wouldn't talk about it. I remember when I was 10, going to Safeway, shopping on a Saturday with my mom, and seeing a National Enquirer or the World News or one of those, supermarket rags with the headline, "Flying Saucers Killed My Horse." And that was the Snippy the Horse case. I remember that as a kid, bugging my mom to give me 25 cents or whatever it was to buy it. And of course, I devoured the article before I even got home. And it's interesting that I should end up in Colorado in the San Luis Valley, about 40 miles from where that case took place. And I got to know the owner of the horse, and I have the only full-length video interview with him. And I'm probably one of the the most knowledgeable people about that case now because of the amount of work that I put in on it. It's a whole chapter in my book, Stalking the Herd, which we talked about last time I was here. So, what can I say? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, good. We have some.
Oh, he is the guy that disses Linda Moulton Howe. I recall his past appearance on your show. He knows everything. Just ask him. Well, Phil.
Oh, I see you're in the chat room.
Yeah, I don't diss Linda Moulton Howe. I just don't agree with her conclusions. I'm very grateful to Linda. She trained me how to interview people out in the field. She is a tremendously courageous investigator. I think she's kind of gone off the rails a bit in her work. She's got blinders on. She's figured it all out, and she only looks at the data that supports her conclusions. But I don't diss her. I just don't agree with her.
Yeah, well, I think...
And yes, I did spend time, guest 625. Yes, I did spend time talking UFOs and crop circles and the paranormal and politics with Lawrence Rockefeller. He funded me for 2 years.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
I didn't even... Okay, so you're reading off the chat room. I was going to read you some questions on the forum that I think these were sent in.
Yeah, I'm in the chat room. Where's the forum?
The forum... It's a drop down on the website as well, but I'll read you this question here. Do you think cattle mutilations are caused by humans? Are there any cases you are familiar with to appear to involve a level of surgical technique or surgical technology that would suggest something more advanced than a human source?
Yes, there are. There are cases that I believe are high strange. They even paranormal. A great example of that would be a case in Iowa in 1980. The head of the Iowa Veterinary College, or Iowa State Veterinary College, I think his name was John Andrews, attempted to duplicate a fresh calf mutilation. He and his veterinary pathologist buddies attempted to duplicate a case side by side in the pathology lab, and they, with great difficulty, were able to duplicate all the surgeries. But his comment was in the pathology report, whoever did this had to have been a world-class veterinary pathologist or surgeon, because they almost were not able to cut the tongue out deep in the esophagus the way it was done on the case. They attempted to duplicate it on a calf, and with great difficulty they were able to do it. But there were only a handful of people really that are capable of have that kind of skill set. So. And there are other cases. We had a case, this calf was missing its brain with no break into the skull. The brain case was completely dry. The animal was found in 5 inches of snow. The respiratory organs, the lungs were gone. The spine was gone from the back of the skull to where the spine joins the hips. The right front leg was gone. The liver and heart were surgically perfectly excised and left in the bottom of the body cavity. Those are the 2 organs that animals go after first, by the way, scavengers. And it was found in a pristine 5 inches of fresh snow. And there was 1 drop of blood that we found, and it was on the back left hoof of the animal. That, in my estimation, and the veterinarian that looked at the case and the sheriff and the investigators, was physically impossible for someone to pull that off. So, I mean, I could give you example after example, but these are the exception. The vast majority of cases could be done by someone proficient who knew what they were doing and was trained. The vast majority of cases are done, it appears, with a sharp implement like a scalpel. I did turn in a number of cases to a hematologist who worked with Linda in Denver, Dr. John Altshuler, And in 2 of those cases, if I remember correctly, there was evidence of high heat. So some sort of heat implement was used, whether it was a hot knife or possibly some sort of lasing instrument. I don't know, but the wound seemed to be sealed,
like cauterized or whatever.
Cauterized, yeah. There was cooked hemoglobin along the incisional edge, but that's way the exception. Those cases are, way the exception. The vast majority of cases I saw were either people misidentifying scavenger action or the cases that appeared to have been perpetrated by someone with skill. The vast majority of them were with a sharp cutting implement, and someone with skill could have done those things.
Yeah. I remember some of the things you said in the last show that I thought was really fascinating, but someone in the chat room wanted to know if what the frequency was of these mutilations happening downwind or downstream of nuke plants or test zones.
Yeah, that was a theory that was arrived at by my mentor, David Perkins, who he and I are co-authoring the follow-up to Stalking the Herd called Mute Speak. David was the first one to notice and realize that the areas of high incidence or regions where these cases tended to cluster seem to be all downwind and downstream of where we utilize, mine, weaponize, uranium. Downwind from power plants, downstream from power plants, downwind of the Nevada test site. If you look at a map of radiation, above ground radiation from 100, nuclear tests, detonations. The areas where most of that fallout occurred tends to be where quite a number of the cases, I'd almost say a majority of cases, are clustered in the upper Midwest, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Kansas, Nebraska. These areas were in the way the jet stream works, a lot of that radiation was deposited there. And then if you go downwind and downstream from weapons labs, missile silo fields, places, uranium mines, that sort of thing, there are exceptions to that rule, of course. This is mostly a west or east of the Rockies scenario. As you go west of the Rockies, the mutilations dramatically fall off in number. The vast majority of them are on the front range of the Rockies, on the east side of the Rockies, and then out in the Midwest.
Does that have anything to do with the? I'm sorry. Does that have anything to do with the head count, the herd? I mean, the head of cattle population.
Well, yeah, I mean, you do have plenty of cattle on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon. Lesser so in Nevada, lesser so in Idaho. But yeah, that's where your largest concentration of cattle is, from Texas north to the Dakotas.
Wow. Now another question that came up in the forum is what is, and you talked earlier briefly about the San Luis Valley there, but what's your opinion on why certain locations on our planet seem to be hotspots for UFO activity? And do you think there is a reason for this that we have yet to consider?
Well, Dr. Louis Turry came up with a formula that I've kind of expanded upon. And we both noticed that if you have an area where you have sacred sites for indigenous people, Indian reservations, and this is I'm talking about North America primarily here, and those locations have unusual geophysical properties, whether it's the close proximity of maximum and minimum magnetic field strength in close proximity to one another, gravitic lows, for instance, aquifers, and you'll often find that those areas have indigenous legends of flying seed pods, flying shields, flying canoes. You have waves of activity and flaps of activity that tend to go on longer. They tend to be centralized, and invariably you have a U.S. military presence. And oftentimes they're trying to expand their presence. And if you have those 5 things in a particular region, chances are you're going to have all kinds of weirdness, whether it's cryptozoological sightings of wild men, Bigfoot, Momo, skunk apes, or whatever name you want to use, strange aberrant social behavior, weird weather. All these things tend to cluster around areas that I would call a window area, a doorway area, a hotspot, a portal area. So if you look at those 5 elements and they're present in a location, all you have to do is start doing some research and doing some digging in newspaper archives and look back into your primary source material. You'll uncover an incredible potpourri of weirdness. Trust me on that. I've done it.
Well, that's it for the free part of the show. Thank you so much for listening. And if you want to catch the whole show and all the archives and put it in your media player or listen on the website, all you have to do is go to podcastufo.com and click on support the show for only $2 or more a month, and it would really help. I hope all you American citizens or people abroad from America who enjoy Thanksgiving have a great one. And we'll be back next week. I do not have a guest. All of a sudden, the guest from the X-Files, one of the actors into UFOs, canceled at the last minute. He's going to reschedule. So if you look on our website on Sunday, I'll have next week's guest on there, and you're welcome to join the forum and to post questions or send an email to martin@podcastufo.com with questions for that guest. See you next week, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.